Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex here. Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be looking at one of the most controversial moments in Formula One's history, the 2005 United States Grand Prix. But before we do so, I want to quickly note about the gameplay. This is iRacing Formula 3 round the Charlotte's Roval. These are my first few laps. I know they're not particularly good, so please don't have a go at me for it. I know they're not particularly great, but I was just getting used to the car, the track, and trying to find some sort of setup that worked. So let's get into this. Let's talk about the United States Grand Prix in 2005, because we went into this Grand Prix with a championship that, I don't know, it wasn't that close. Fernando Alonso was leading quite comfortably. He was going to this race with an over 20-point margin ahead of Kimi Raikkonen in this championship. He was on 59 points and Kimi Raikkonen was on 37. And Michael Schumacher hadn't had the greatest start to the season. He was only on 24 points. But we go into this United States Grand Prix, and from the first few practice sessions we start having issues. The Michelin tyres are starting to fail, and there was a big crash involving Ralf Schumacher in his Toyota. The last corner, turn 13, he had a big crash, the same corner where he had crashed a couple of years prior in his Williams. He had crashed here once again in this Toyota, and it was a big accident, and it was a result of a left rear tyre failure, and this accident caused him to be out for the rest of the weekend, and their test driver Ricardo Zonta took over for the rest of the weekend. And it is strange that this was the same spot that he crashed in the previous year, but it's just one of those things. It's a part of the track where, if you watched other videos on YouTube, I think Chamber is a fantastic video on this, which I'll try and link in the description, about why these Michelin tyres were just so bad here today in this Grand Prix. That those tyres were under so much stress through turn 13. It meant that the cars couldn't do a substantial amount of laps, including that turn 13, because they were put under so much stress. It was predicted that every 10 laps or so they'd have to pit to ensure they got to the end of the race distance, which is absolutely insane. But maybe at that time people were, a little bit like, okay, this sort of thing happens in Formula 1, people crash. It's not always down to the car, it's not always down to the tyre, for example. It could be just down to the driver. And especially because Ralf Schumacher had done this before, people might have thought, okay, it's just one of those things. He's struggling with that part of the track. But as the weekend progressed, it became pretty evident that this corner was very dangerous for the Michelin runners. And if they were trying to attempt a full race distance, something bad really could happen at this corner. So they do qualifying, and a pretty typical qualifying session, except from the fact that Jarno Trulli puts it on pole position. So it's kind of disappointing that Toyota, maybe this was their best chance at a race victory in Formula 1, who knows. Possibly not. Ricardo's on to 13th on the grid, but then he'd only just stepped into the car. So I think Toyota were genuinely quite competitive this race weekend, and possibly they could have got a good result. Maybe not a win, as Raikkonen was less of a tenth of a second behind, but possibly a good result, as Trulli was 0.6 of a second clear of third place Jenson Button. But unfortunately, as we've said, the weekend progressed, and it came pretty evident that this was not going to be a feasible race here, because turn 13 was very dangerous. So a lot of plans went underway. All of the Michelin shod teams were trying to find a solution for this race. I think the biggest one was trying to implement a chicane, and I can understand this because, of course, implementing a chicane will slow down the cars through this section of the track, and whilst it would have been a little bit rushed and a little bit shoddy, it would have been a solution that would have been able to, or would have allowed this race to go ahead. But I think a lot of people were saying that this should not have been a championship race. This should have been a non-championship race if they put this chicane in. And there was even a point later on with all the discussions that they were trying to do this race without Ferrari, because understandably Ferrari was struggling that season, and Ferrari wanted to get a race victory. And I guess in a way they were thinking, this is probably our best chance to get a race victory in 2005, is if a lot of the teams have to pull out. So Ferrari weren't too accommodating to this solution. They didn't really want to be involved in any sort of talks about trying to adjust this to ensure that the race could go ahead. But a lot of the teams came together and said that we should run this race, even if it's not FIA approved, we should run this race and try and just get something out there for the fans. But unfortunately, it didn't quite go ahead as planned, and we didn't do a non-championship race. There was a race with only 6 cars out on track. This was undoubtedly one of the darkest moments in Formula 1 history, and it's kind of sad that a solution wasn't fulfilled, because let's be honest, that really marred Formula 1 in America for quite a long time. You can see from the Grand Prix at the Indianapolis track after that point, there was a lot of disappointment and dissatisfaction towards the FIA and Formula One for how they sort of proceeded in the events. Under just common sense should have taken hold in that scenario, and they should have just gone ahead with a non-championship race or just something to enable the Michelin teams to race, because 6 cars out on track is wholly embarrassing. So there were trying to be other solutions. For example, the Michelin teams would do the chicane whilst the Bridgestone runners would not have to do the chicane. That was a solution that was come up, and obviously that does seem quite dangerous, so I can understand why they didn't go ahead with that one. But just some way of slowing them down through turn 13 would have enabled a race to go ahead. But unfortunately there was a little bit of a threat, I guess, coming under, well, the FIA coming under a bit of threat from someone called Mr. Martin. I'm not exactly sure who he is, but I think he was a top figure in the United States in the FIA, and he was saying that any sort of non-championship race or alteration to the track would damage Formula One in America. And to be perfectly honest, I think it would have damaged Formula One in America a lot less than it did with the help of this 2005 Grand Prix going ahead like it maybe should have done in a way with the original track layout, because it's just, this was so embarrassing for Formula One. I remember sitting there and watching this Grand Prix and just being in shock. I mean, I was like 9 years old, but I was just in absolute shock that this was happening. It feels like one of those moments that you just don't want to relive as a Formula One fan, because it was so embarrassing to watch 6 cars go around, and, well, 2 cars on the lead lap. The Ferraris didn't really even have a battle. I think they were trying to stay together to try and make it somewhat interesting, but the 3rd place car finished a lap behind, so did the 4th place car, and the 2 cars finishing 5th and 6th were 2 laps down. So just incredibly embarrassing for Formula One, this whole fiasco really. And okay, the one slither of good that came out of this event was Thiago Monteiro for Jordan getting a podium. I mean, he must have been in such a conflicted situation where he was obviously loving the fact that he got a podium, but at the same time, can you celebrate that? Can you celebrate that? Can you celebrate a podium when 6 cars finished and 2 cars are so much slower than you, the Minardis, and the only person you got to beat is Narain Kartikeyan? I mean, are you really supposed to be celebrating that? I don't know. It must be such a conflicted situation for him, a devastating time for Formula One really that happened. And it did affect Formula One in the United States for a long time, because we did have another race at the United States Grand Prix, at the Indianapolis track, but we quickly saw it get off the Formula One calendar, and I'm assuming this little fiasco was a big part of that. There was a United States Grand Prix held at Indianapolis in 2006 and 2007, but after that it was taken off the calendar for 2008, and we didn't see a United States Grand Prix return to Formula One until 2012, where it went to the Texas track. The circuit of the Americas was the track to bring Formula One back to the United States. But what were your opinions on this? Do you remember watching this race? Do you remember being very embarrassed to see this happen? Because such a high-level motorsport race should never really have to go through this conflict. And are you disappointed, even to this day, that teams couldn't agree on some sort of deal here? Because they were, all the Michelin teams were saying they would run a compromise to try and make sure this race went ahead, and they were trying to get this race to go ahead. I mean, Ferrari were never going to agree with this because they knew this was a perfect chance to win, but they were happy to go ahead with a non-championship Formula One race just to ensure that the fans in the grandstand got that race, which they deserved for paying all that money. And I am disappointed. I'm disappointed. I know it was way over 10 years ago now, but I'm just disappointed that on that day Formula One just couldn't come together and make something great for fans, because it really did destroy the reputation for the Formula One fans in America especially. It destroyed the reputation of Formula One for a long time, and I think even if they did a non-championship race, it would still be much better than doing or going ahead with the race that they did go ahead with, because that was just wholly embarrassing. As I said, the only one slither of good that came out of it was Thiago Monteiro got a podium for Jordan, but I think at the end of the day that's also slightly embarrassing that a car that was a lap down and would probably finish maybe 14th or 15th at best with a full grid managed to get a podium. It's just not good, just not good whatsoever. But we did see Schumacher get another one of his victories, but also Kartikeyan, Albers and Frijacker all got points. It must be the only ever time in Formula 1 history where 2 Jordans and 2 Minardis got points in Formula 1. But, you know, take it with a pinch of salt when they were the only 6 cars to finish. But to be fair to them, they all finished the race. I mean, it would have been wholly embarrassing if one of them retired and missed out on that golden opportunity for points, but it didn't particularly affect the whole season in general. I mean, the sort of deserving champions still won. That was Fernando Alonso. I mean, it was either going to be Alonso or Raikkonen. They were deserving champions. Schumacher and Ferrari weren't good enough that year, so they didn't deserve to win the championship. But the battle for the championship still came down to the 2 best drivers, and at the end of the day, the teams at the back of the grid were still the teams at the back of the grid. The points scored from Jordan and Minardi didn't put them ahead of anyone. They still finished 9th and 10th in the Constructors. So in some ways it didn't change anything realistically, but in a lot of ways it was just very disappointing for Formula 1 and very embarrassing for the sport. So what are your thoughts? Please let me know in the comment section down below. Do you still think about this Grand Prix when, you know, controversial moments come up in Formula 1? Do you think this is one of the most controversial moments in Formula 1, or do you think it's just one of those things? Let me know in the comment section down below. Of course, I'll leave a link to Chainbear's video in the description and any other videos I find on this topic that I think are interesting. I just think it's a really weird turn of events that ended up in one of the most controversial moments in Formula 1's history. So, thank you for watching. Have a great day. It's been Alex Amade. Goodbye.